I was always a strong woman, a former marathon runner, but a sudden illness turned me into an old woman. I thought my daughter was just too busy to care for my mysterious illness, but I never suspected her husband, this caring doctor, was a puppet master. What I found in my medical records wasn't a diagnosis, but a meticulously planned script to get me out of their way. What happens when you trust your children more than yourself? My daughter, Sarah, always had a way of turning my heart into a punching bag. She was an artist, you see, a delicate soul who lived in a world of watercolors and self-righteous indignation. I, on the other hand, am a realist, a woman who earned her stripes and her scars in the unforgiving arena of a dental office. My life savings, every last dime, were the result of 30 years of prying into people's mouths and trying to convince them that flossing was a worthwhile activity. I was good at it, too. I could spot a lie from a mile away, and I knew how to fix what was broken, whether it was a crooked tooth or a crumbling marriage. But I never saw this one coming. It all started with a simple ache in my joints, a dull, persistent throb that I first chalked up to old age. I'm 63, and the body, as they say, has a way of reminding you of every single birthday candle you've blown out. But the ache grew, spreading from my hands to my knees until it felt like a silent, invisible tide was dragging me under. I went to my doctor, a kind man named Dr. Miller, who ran a battery of tests and came back with a diagnosis that hit me like a ton of bricks: a rare, degenerative autoimmune disease. He said it was manageable with the right medication and physical therapy, but the words incurable and progressive echoed in the sterile air of his office. I was a fighter, though. I had to be. My whole life, I'd been the one to fix things, the one to hold it all together. I had no husband, no other children, just Sarah. My bright, beautiful, and utterly self-absorbed Sarah. She was my only family. She was all I had left. The first person I called was, of course, Sarah. I sat in my car, the phone clutched in my hand, and tried to find the right words. How do you tell your child that you're slowly falling apart? I told her about the diagnosis, about the pain, about the medication and the physical therapy. I told her it was going to be expensive, that I would have to dip into the savings I had intended to use for a world trip. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I held my breath waiting for a word of comfort, a promise of support. Instead, she let out a short, hollow laugh. "Mom, you can't be serious. You have to be more responsible." More responsible? For what? Getting sick? My voice was a tight, controlled wire. I'm not asking you to bail me out. I'm telling you what's happening. Her tone shifted from dismissive to something sharper, colder. "Look, Mom, Mark and I are trying to save up for our new house. We can't afford to just throw money at your problems. You need to handle your own issues." My heart sank. I had thought back to every dollar I had ever spent on her. The art classes, the expensive university, the down payment on her condo, the lavish wedding I had paid for myself, even the damn red Mustang she had complained about. I had never, not once, asked her to pay me back. But in her mind, my entire existence was a problem to be solved, and now it was my turn to solve it. My world, which had already shrunk to the size of a doctor's office, felt even smaller. I hung up the phone and just sat there, my mind numb with betrayal. It was an emotional betrayal, one far more profound than any financial one could ever be. It was the feeling of being discarded, of being seen as a burden rather than a person. The next few weeks were a brutal lesson in emotional neglect. Sarah became a master of evasion, a professional ghost. She'd text me back with short, meaningless phrases, always too busy to talk on the phone. "K, hope you feel better." Or "TTYL, busy with Mark." I started feeling like I was talking to a stranger, a callous, indifferent stranger who happened to share my DNA. The pain in my joints was nothing compared to the pain in my heart. The emotional distress was a poison, a slow-acting venom that made me feel more hopeless than the disease itself. I had nowhere to turn, no one to confide in. My friends, the few I had, were busy with their own lives, their own problems. And my family, well, my family was the one causing the problems. My loneliness became a physical thing, a constant companion that sat on my chest and made it hard to breathe. I was sifting through my medical records one afternoon, trying to find some semblance of hope, some small detail I had missed. The papers were a mess of medical jargon and blurry charts, but I read every line, looking for a sign, a clue, anything. And then I saw it, tucked away in a small, almost imperceptible corner of the lab results. A note, handwritten in my doctor's scrawl. It was just a small note to his assistant, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. "Remind Mrs. Carlson to get the follow-up blood work done. Also, check with the lab. Something is off with her recent results. Maybe a mix-up?" A mix-up. The word repeated in my head, an alarm bell ringing in the quiet of my house. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a rush of cold fury that momentarily eclipsed the pain in my joints. A mix-up? With my health? With my life? I couldn't get a hold of Dr. Miller. He was out of town. His assistant kept saying the results were all normal now, but I knew better. I felt a primal instinct, a mother's intuition that something was deeply, terribly wrong. I knew I couldn't just sit here and wait. I had to do something. I went to the lab myself, a place I had only ever seen from the outside. I walked in, my cane tapping against the tile floor, trying to look as frail and harmless as possible. The young man at the counter, a kind-faced boy with a mop of unruly hair, looked at me with a mixture of pity and confusion. "Can I help you, ma'am?" I smiled weakly. "I was just checking on some test results for a Dr. Miller. He said there might have been a mix-up with my sample." The young man's eyes widened, and he excused himself. When he came back, his face was pale. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry. It seems there was a mix-up. Your blood sample was indeed switched with another one." My heart stopped. My blood sample was switched. I was not sick. I was never sick. I was perfectly healthy. The rage that filled me was a physical thing, a fire that burned through every ounce of pain and fear. It was all a lie, a cruel, calculated lie. But why? The walk home from the lab was a blur. My mind was a maelstrom of thoughts, 1,000 questions swirling around a single, horrifying truth. I was never sick. The diagnosis, the pain, the loneliness, it had all been a carefully orchestrated illusion. But by whom? And why? I was so lost in my thoughts that I almost didn't notice the black car that was parked on my street. A black Mercedes, the same car I had seen Mark, my son-in-law, drive on multiple occasions. My mind went into overdrive, a frantic search for clues, for a reason, for a motive. And then it hit me. The supplements, the miracle cure that Mark had so generously offered me, the ones he had been urging me to take. I had been feeling strange ever since I started taking them, a vague sense of unease, a constant fatigue. It wasn't a disease, it was a symptom of a poison they had been slowly feeding me. I felt a wave of nausea, a mix of disgust and horror. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was an act of pure evil. They were trying to make me sick. They were trying to poison me.
I went back to my medical file, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the papers. I was no longer looking for a medical diagnosis. I was looking for a criminal conspiracy. And I found it. Tucked away in a small, almost imperceptible note on a doctor's chart was the name of a law firm. It was a well-known firm that specialized in estate planning and probate. Why would Mark and Sarah be consulting with an estate lawyer? A chilling thought crossed my mind. They weren't just trying to test a new drug. They were trying to get my money. They were trying to get my house. They were trying to get it all. I felt a new kind of pain, a cold, icy fury that made the pain in my joints seem insignificant. They were willing to make me sick, to put me in pain, all for money. I looked at the note again, the letters swimming on the page. My daughter, my own flesh and blood, was in on this. My medical records didn't just reveal a secret plan. They revealed a lie, a web of lies that had me trapped in a future of pain and loneliness. But now I knew the truth, and I wouldn't let them get away with it. I needed a plan that was as cold and calculating as theirs. I had to be smart, I had to be strong, and I had to make sure they got exactly what they deserved. My first order of business was to get my hands on Mark's miracle supplements. I knew they were in a bottle in my medicine cabinet, a bottle he had so thoughtfully given to me. I took it out and looked at it, the innocuous label mocking me. K27, it read. I had a friend who was a chemist, a brilliant but eccentric woman named Beverly. She had a lab in her garage, a place filled with bubbling beakers and strange smells. I drove over there, the bottle of supplements clutched in my hand. Beverly, with her wild gray hair and lab coat stained with unknown substances, looked at me with concern. Elizabeth, you look like you've seen a ghost. What's in the bottle? I told her the whole story, the diagnosis, the pain, the loneliness, the switched blood samples, the note in my file. She listened without a word, her expression growing darker with every detail. When she finished, she took the bottle from my hand. She said, "Leave it with me," her voice grim. "I'll run some tests. I'll find out what's in this poison." I left her garage with a new sense of purpose, a fire in my belly that had been extinguished by a lifetime of selfless acts. I was no longer a victim. I was a warrior. I went home and started my own investigation. I went through old photos, old letters, old emails. I found a picture of Sarah and Mark at their wedding. They were smiling, their faces full of joy. I remembered a conversation I had with Sarah on that day. She had told me she was so happy, so in love. I had believed her. I had believed in a lie. I felt a surge of anger, a desire for revenge so strong it made me tremble. I was not just fighting for my life, I was fighting for my dignity. I was fighting for the decades of love and sacrifice I had given them, only to have it all thrown back in my face. The next few days were a blur of research, of sleepless nights spent poring over medical journals and legal documents. I found an article about Mark's company and a new drug they were developing. The article mentioned a trial that had been shut down because of a negative side effect on the test subjects. The symptoms they described were identical to mine. He had been testing the drug on me, and my own daughter had been helping him. The rage that filled me was a physical thing, a fire that burned through every ounce of pain and fear. I was not a sick, helpless old woman. I was a survivor. I was a fighter, and they had no idea who they were dealing with. I had a plan now, a plan to expose them and to make them pay for every single ounce of pain they had inflicted on me. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I was up against two cunning and ruthless people, but I had one thing they didn't have, the truth. And in the end, the truth always wins. I was going to make sure of that. I will get it. I will get it. I will get it. But how? This is a question I've asked myself many times. But what happened next? That's a story you won't want to miss. What happens when you trust your own family only to find out they're hiding a dark secret? You won't believe how a simple medical record turns into a weapon of revenge. The next chapter will shock you.
Beverly's garage smelled of a volatile mix of isopropyl alcohol and bitter almonds, a scent that I had once found comforting in its scientific rigor, but which now filled me with a sense of dread. She was bent over a series of beakers, her spectacles perched on the tip of her nose as she carefully extracted a small, clear liquid from one of the containers. The bottle of K27 supplements I had given her was sitting on a lab bench, looking entirely too innocent for the sinister nature of its contents. "Well, Elizabeth," she said, her voice a low hum of concentration, "I've run the initial tests, and what's in these isn't an autoimmune treatment." My heart hammered against my ribs. "What is it then?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She looked up, her expression grim. "It's a chemical compound, an inhibitor. It blocks the body's natural anti-inflammatory response. It won't kill you, not directly, but it will make you incredibly sick. It will mimic the symptoms of a progressive autoimmune disease." My blood ran cold. He wasn't just poisoning me. He was playing God, creating a disease to test his own twisted cure. He was a monster. I felt a surge of rage so powerful it made my hands tremble. He was a monster, and my daughter was his accomplice. My beautiful, fragile Sarah, whom I had sacrificed everything for, was helping this man poison me. I wanted to scream, to break something, to just lose my mind in the face of this utter evil. But I didn't. Instead, I took a deep breath, the cold rage a steady fire in my belly. I had to be smart. I had to get proof. I had to expose them. Beverly, sensing my turmoil, placed a hand on my shoulder. "Elizabeth, you need to be careful. This is a very serious thing. If you go to the authorities with this, you'll need more than just my word. You'll need concrete proof. Proof that you're being poisoned and proof that they're the ones doing it." Her words were a cold splash of water on my burning anger. She was right. I couldn't just storm into their lives and accuse them of this heinous act. They would deny it, and I would be left with nothing. I needed a plan that was as calculated and as cold as theirs. I needed to know why they were doing this. What could possibly be worth poisoning me over? My mind raced, trying to piece together the clues I had already found. The note in my medical file, the law firm specializing in estate planning, the articles about Mark's company and the new drug. It all pointed to one thing. They wanted my money, my life savings, my home, my entire estate. They were willing to make me sick and possibly even kill me for a few $1,000,000. The sheer audacity of it, the level of evil it took to even conceive of such a plan, left me speechless. I went back home, my mind reeling. I sat in my quiet living room, the evening sun casting long shadows on the walls. This was the house my late husband and I had bought together, the house where we had raised Sarah, the house that held a lifetime of memories, both happy and sad. And now my own daughter wanted it to take it from me. I felt a profound sense of loss, a grief that was deeper than any I had ever felt. It wasn't just about the money or the house. It was about the betrayal, the complete and utter lack of humanity. They had looked at me, their mother, and seen not a person, but a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be removed. I realized then that I couldn't just get my revenge. I had to make them pay, not with money, but with the one thing they couldn't live without: their reputation.
I needed to ruin them. I needed to expose them to the world. My thoughts turned to the media, the news outlets, the local newspapers, the online forums. The power of the internet was a double-edged sword. It could be a tool for good or a weapon for destruction. I knew that if I could get my story out there, if I could make them public, they would be ruined. Their careers, their reputations, their entire lives would be destroyed. It was a tempting thought, a delicious fantasy of revenge. But I knew I couldn't just go to the media with a half-baked story. I needed concrete, irrefutable proof. I needed to find a way to tie the supplements to Mark's company, to the clinical trials, to the money they were trying to steal from me. I had a feeling the answers were somewhere in my house, somewhere they wouldn't think to look. I started my search in my home office, a small room I had always kept locked. It was a sanctuary for me, a place where I kept my most personal and important documents. I went through old tax returns, bank statements, legal documents. I found the original will I had drawn up years ago, a will they didn't know about. I had made sure to have it notarized and stored in a secure location. I also found a small, unassuming file that contained my original medical records, the ones before Mark started giving me his supplements, the ones that showed I was perfectly healthy. I knew I couldn't just go to the police with this. They would call it a family dispute, a misunderstanding. I needed to do something more. I needed to be smart. I needed to be a step ahead of them. I was going to make sure they got exactly what they deserved. The next chapter will reveal how I made my move.
The days that followed were a cold, calculating game of cat and mouse. I continued to play the part of the sick, frail mother, complaining about my aching joints and my constant fatigue on the phone with Sarah. Her feigned concern was a sickening sweet poison, but I swallowed it, knowing that every single lie I told brought me one step closer to the truth. Mark would occasionally call, his voice laced with forced casualness, asking about my health. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Carlson? You're taking your supplements, right?" I would feign a sigh of exhaustion. "Yes, Mark, I'm taking them. They don't seem to be helping, though." His voice would drop to a low, conspiratorial whisper. "Just give it time, Mrs. Carlson. It's a progressive disease. The cure takes time." I wanted to tell him that he was the disease, that his words were the poison, but I held my tongue. I needed more evidence. I needed to catch them in the act. I knew that Mark and Sarah were desperate. They had been counting on me getting sick and giving up. They had been counting on me to be a weak, helpless old woman. But I wasn't. I was a fighter, and I was going to fight them with everything I had. I decided to set a trap. I called Sarah and told her that I was feeling particularly ill, that I was going to have to go to the hospital. I told her that I was so weak I had barely managed to pack a bag. I made a point of mentioning that I was so disoriented I had left my purse on the kitchen counter. My purse, which contained my original medical records, the ones from before the diagnosis, the ones that proved I was healthy. I knew they would come for them. I knew they couldn't resist. I went to a friend's house, a neighbor who was a retired detective. I told him everything, from the switched blood samples to the poisoned supplements. He listened with a grim expression, and when I was finished, he just nodded. "Elizabeth, you've got a lot of courage. I'll help you. We can set up a hidden camera in your kitchen. We'll catch them in the act." I agreed, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. This was the moment of truth. The next day, I went back home. My neighbor had installed the camera, and I watched the live feed on his computer. I sat in his living room, my hands shaking, and waited. It didn't take long. A few hours later, I saw them on the screen. Sarah and Mark walking into my house, their faces a mask of feigned concern. They went straight to the kitchen. Sarah looked at her husband with a smile. "See? I told you she'd leave it out. She's so out of it these days." My heart sunk. The words were a knife in my gut. They were laughing at me. They were laughing at my pain. Mark walked over to the counter and opened my purse. He took out the medical records, his eyes scanning the pages. A look of confusion, then horror crossed his face. "Sarah, look at this. These are her old records. They're perfect. There's no sign of the disease." Sarah snatched the papers from his hand, her face a mask of disbelief. "What? That's impossible. I saw the new ones. They showed she was sick." My neighbor, the retired detective, was watching the scene with a look of pure disgust on his face. "They are monsters," he whispered. "They're just monsters." But then the scene on the screen changed. Mark and Sarah were no longer looking at the medical records. They were looking at each other, their faces a mix of fear and anger. "The video," he said, his voice a low growl. "I put it in her purse. I told her it was the key to a cure for her disease. But it's not. It's her last will and testament, and it leaves everything to her dog." I wanted to laugh. It was a perfect piece of black humor, a perfect act of revenge. I had a small, unassuming file in my home office. It contained my original will, my will that I had drawn up years ago, a will they didn't know about. They had been so focused on getting my money, they hadn't even considered the possibility that I had already outsmarted them. The next moment, Mark did something that I never expected. He looked directly into the camera, a look of pure, unadulterated evil on his face. "Elizabeth," he said, his voice a low, chilling whisper, "you're a fool. You think you've won? You've already lost. You're alone. You have no one. You're a sick old woman, and no one will ever believe you." The words were a punch to the gut. He was right. I was alone. I had no one, and I had no proof. The video, the medical records, it was all circumstantial. They could easily deny everything. My victory felt hollow. My revenge, so carefully planned, so meticulously executed, had failed. They were still free. They were still winning. My neighbor, the retired detective, put a hand on my shoulder. "Elizabeth, don't give up. We have to keep fighting." But I was tired, so tired. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis. It was a different kind of pain, a deep, soul-crushing ache that made my legs feel even weaker than the disease. This is the culmination of everything you've been waiting for. You've witnessed the betrayal, the pain, and the slow-burning revenge. What happens next will not only shock you, but will also make you question everything you thought you knew about family. This is it. This is the moment I finally put them in their place, and you'll see every second of it.
The hollow victory I felt in the previous chapter, the bitter taste of my failed revenge, didn't last long. Mark's chilling words, his declaration that I was a sick old woman with no one to believe her, echoed in my ears. He was right, or so he thought. But what he didn't know was that while I was waiting for them to take the bait, I had been working on a backup plan, a plan B. I had taken the supplements that Beverly had analyzed and put them in a secure location. I had also taken the original lab reports, the ones that proved I was healthy, and had them notarized. I knew that in a court of law, this would all be circumstantial evidence, but this wasn't a court of law. This was a war, and I was going to win it. I was going to make sure they got exactly what they deserved and not a penny more. I started by calling my lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Susan, who had a reputation for being as tough as nails. I told her the whole story, from the initial diagnosis to the switched blood samples, the poison supplements, and my daughter's betrayal. I showed her the notarized medical records, the note from Dr. Miller, and the lab report from Beverly. Susan listened without a word, her expression grim. When I finished, she just nodded. "Elizabeth, this is a very serious matter. If we go to the police, it'll be a long, drawn-out process. But if we go to the media, well, that's a different story. Mark's company is a publicly traded company. If this story gets out, it will be a PR nightmare for them. Their stock will plummet, and his reputation will be ruined. We'll have them right where we want them." Her words were a ray of light in the darkness. I felt a surge of hope, a new sense of purpose. I wasn't just fighting for my dignity. I was fighting for my life. I was fighting for justice. And I was going to win. I gave Susan my blessing to move forward with the plan. She contacted a local news reporter, a woman named Jennifer who specialized in investigative journalism. Jennifer was a bulldog. She was relentless, and she had a reputation for not backing down. I met with her, and I told her my story. I showed her the medical records, the lab report, the note from Dr. Miller. I also showed her the video footage from my neighbor's hidden camera, the footage that showed Mark and Sarah going through my purse, the footage that showed their contempt for me. Jennifer watched the video with a look of pure disgust on her face. When it was over, she looked at me with a grim expression. "Elizabeth, this is a bombshell. This is going to be a front-page story. This is going to ruin them." The next few days were a blur of interviews, phone calls, and legal documents. I was a whirlwind of activity, a woman on a mission. I was no longer a sick, frail old woman. I was a force of nature. I was a survivor. I was a fighter. And I was going to make sure they got what they deserved and not a penny more. The story was set to break on a Friday, and I knew that Mark and Sarah would be watching. I wanted them to be part of my revenge. I wanted them to see my triumph. I wanted them to feel the same sense of dread and despair that I had felt. I knew they would be at their new house, a lavish mansion they had bought with my money. I wanted them to see the story break while they were enjoying the fruits of their betrayal. It was a cruel thought, a perfect piece of black humor, and I savored every single moment of it. I sat in my quiet living room, the television on, and waited. The clock ticked, each second feeling like an eternity. And then, at 6 o'clock sharp, the news broke. The story was a masterpiece of investigative journalism. Jennifer had done her research. She had found other victims, other people who had been given the same miracle cure by Mark. The story was a bombshell, a perfect blend of personal betrayal and corporate greed. The reporter on the screen, a stern-faced man with a serious expression, looked directly into the camera. "We have obtained medical records and lab reports that suggest a chilling conspiracy. A local woman, Elizabeth Carlson, was diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disease. But our sources say that the diagnosis was a lie. Her son-in-law, Mark, a senior executive at a major pharmaceutical company, had been giving her a miracle cure that was in fact a poison that mimicked the symptoms of the disease he was trying to cure."
The images on the screen were of me, of my medical records, and of the bottle of supplements. The story was a perfect storm of betrayal, greed, and corporate corruption. The phone rang, and I answered it. It was Sarah. Her voice was a mix of anger and disbelief. "Mom, what the hell have you done?" I smiled, a cold, empty smile. "I've done what any mother would do, Sarah. I've exposed a monster. And you, my dear, are a part of his monstrous plan." Her voice rose to a shriek. "You're insane! You're a liar! You're a sick old woman, and no one will ever believe you." I laughed, a low, controlled laugh. "Oh, but they will, Sarah. They already do. And I'm not sick. I'm not a liar. I'm a survivor. And I'm coming for you. I'm coming for all of you." I hung up the phone and just sat there, the television still on, my mind numb with a mix of triumph and sadness. It was a victory, but a hollow one. I had lost my daughter, my only child, but I had gained something else. I had gained my dignity. I had gained my life back. The next few days were a blur of legal documents and public relations. Mark's company was in free fall. Their stock had plummeted and the CEO had resigned. Mark was fired and he was facing multiple lawsuits and a criminal investigation. Sarah had disappeared. Her phone was off and her social media accounts had been deleted. She was a ghost, a woman who had lost everything. Her husband, her career, her reputation. She had nothing left. I felt a flicker of pity for her, a small, tiny flame of empathy that I quickly extinguished. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. I was sitting in my living room, the evening sun casting long shadows on the walls, when the doorbell rang. I opened the door, and there she was, Sarah. Her hair was a mess, her clothes were wrinkled, and her face was streaked with tears. She looked older, more tired, more broken than I had ever seen her. "Mom," she said, her voice a low, broken whisper, "I'm so sorry." The words were a knife in my gut. I had wanted her to say them for so long, but now that she had, they meant nothing. The pain, the betrayal, the loneliness, it had all been too much. It was too late. I looked at her and I saw a stranger. I saw a monster. I saw a woman who had tried to poison her own mother for money. "You're too late, Sarah. You're too late," I said, my voice as cold as ice. "I don't have a daughter anymore. I have a life, and I'm not sharing it with you." I closed the door in her face and just stood there, my back against the cold wood, my eyes closed. I felt a single tear roll down my cheek, a tear of triumph and of sadness. I had won. I had gotten my revenge. I had exposed them. I had ruined them. But I had lost my daughter. The pain was still there, but it was a different kind of pain now. It was the pain of a survivor, the pain of a woman who had fought for her life and had won. I had a new beginning, a new life, and I was going to live it, and I was going to live it to the fullest. I was going to travel. I was going to see the world. I was going to live the life that they had tried to steal from me, and I was going to do it all on my own terms. I was finally free.
The quiet triumph I had felt after Sarah's visit was short-lived. The media storm had died down, and while Mark's company was in shambles and he was facing legal action, Sarah had vanished. She was a ghost, a phantom who had slipped through the cracks. The police couldn't find her, and her phone remained off. I knew she was out there somewhere, but I had no idea where. My days were filled with a strange kind of emptiness. The adrenaline that had fueled my revenge was gone, and what was left was a profound sense of loneliness. I had won the battle, but I had lost the war.
I had my life back, but it felt hollow without the one person I had fought so hard to protect. I had a new beginning, but it felt like the end. I was sitting in my living room, my gaze fixed on the television screen, when a news report came on. It was about a series of corporate fraud cases, and the reporter mentioned Mark's name. He said that a key witness in the case, a former colleague of Mark's, had just been found dead. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about murder. This was about a man who was willing to kill to protect his secrets. And I knew that I was next. I was the key witness. I was the one who had exposed him. I was the one who had ruined his life. He was coming for me. My neighbor, the retired detective, was over in a flash. He had seen the news report, and he was worried. "Elizabeth, you need to go to the police. You need to tell them everything you know." But I shook my head. "No," I said, my voice as steady as a rock. "He's not going to stop. He's not going to rest until I'm gone. I need to be a step ahead of him. I need to finish this, once and for all." My neighbor looked at me with a mix of fear and admiration. "What are you going to do?" he asked, his voice a low whisper. "I'm going to set a trap that he can't escape." I went to my home office and took out a small, unassuming flash drive. It contained a copy of all the evidence I had collected, the medical records, the lab report, the note from Dr. Miller, everything. I also had a secret, a final ace up my sleeve, a video I had recorded of myself detailing my entire ordeal and exposing Mark's final, desperate act. I knew that I was risking everything. I knew that I was putting my life on the line, but I also knew that I had no other choice. This was my life's final chapter, and I was going to write it myself. I called Mark's lawyer, a slick, greasy man who sounded like a rat who had just been caught in a trap. "I want to make a deal," I said, my voice as steady as a rock. "I have something that can put your client away for life. I have proof that he murdered his former colleague." The lawyer's voice was a low growl. "What do you want?" "I want to meet with him. I want to meet with him alone. I want to show him what I have, and in return, I'll give him the flash drive." It was a bold move, a dangerous move, but I knew he would take the bait. He was a desperate man, and desperate men make mistakes. He agreed to meet me at a deserted warehouse on the outskirts of town. I knew it was a trap. I knew he was going to try and kill me, but I had a plan. I had a final ace up my sleeve, and I was going to win. The old warehouse stood like a forgotten skeleton against the bruised twilight sky, its rusted metal walls a testament to a long-dead industrial era. I pulled up in a nondescript sedan I had borrowed, the engine's purr the only sound in the suffocating silence. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of dust and decay. Mark was waiting for me, his face a mask of forced calm that didn't quite hide the feral desperation in his eyes. He looked thinner, his tailored suit hanging loosely on his frame. The fall from grace had been swift and brutal. "You're a fool, Elizabeth," he said, his voice a low, chilling whisper that echoed in the vast space. "You should have stayed at home. You should have just let it go." "And you're a monster, Mark," I replied, my voice steady, betraying none of the fear I felt in my gut. "You should have known better than to mess with a woman who has nothing left to lose." I walked towards him, the single, unshaded bulb hanging from the ceiling casting long, dancing shadows that made him look like a caricature of himself. He gestured to a dusty table. "Give me the flash drive, the one with the evidence of my unfortunate business dealings." I knew he was referring to the murder, but he couldn't bring himself to say the word. "First, you confess," I said, a cold smile on my face. "You confess to everything, the poison, the fraud, the murder of your colleague. You confess it all, and I'll give you the flash drive.
I'll give you the last hope you have of getting out of this with a shred of dignity." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "Dignity? You've already taken that from me, you old witch. You've ruined my life. You've ruined everything." "You ruined your own life, Mark," I shot back. "You and your wife. You tried to poison your own mother-in-law for money. You're a coward and a thief." His face twisted in a snarl, the mask of calm finally slipping. "You think you've won? You think you can blackmail me? You're a fool, Elizabeth. You're a sick old woman and no one will ever believe you. That flash drive you're so proud of is nothing. I'll kill you and I'll get away with it, just like I got away with it before." He lunged at me, his eyes filled with a murderous rage, but I was ready. I sidestepped him, and as he stumbled past, I pulled out a small, inconspicuous device from my pocket. It was a GPS tracker, a device I had placed on his car a week ago. He froze, his eyes widening in a mixture of fear and confusion. He asked, his voice trembling, "What is that?" "It's the reason you're going to jail, Mark," I said, my voice as cold as ice. "It's the reason you're going to pay for what you did. I knew you were going to try and kill me, so I took a few precautions. You see, this device isn't just a tracker. It's a distress signal, and it's set to go off if I don't check in with the police every hour on the hour. And guess what? I haven't checked in for the last half hour." He looked at me with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. He knew he was trapped. He knew he had lost. The look on his face was a mix of fury and despair. It was the face of a man who had gambled everything and had lost it all. "You're a monster," he said, his voice a low growl. "You're worse than I am." "No, Mark," I said, a triumphant smile on my face. "I'm a survivor, and you're a loser, and you're going to rot in jail for the rest of your life." Just then we heard the sound of sirens in the distance, their wail a sweet melody to my ears. Mark's eyes widened in horror. He had been so focused on me, on his revenge, that he had forgotten to check for a trap. He had forgotten to check for a backup plan. He had forgotten that I was a fighter. He had forgotten that I was a survivor. He had forgotten that I had nothing left to lose. And now he was going to pay for it. The look on his face was worth more than all the money in the world. He was a broken man, a man who had lost everything. And I had done it. I had won. The wailing sirens grew louder, a chorus of justice in the dark of the warehouse. Mark stood frozen, his face a grotesque mask of fury and despair. A man who had finally realized he had gambled everything and lost. The flash of blue and red lights painted the grimy walls, and a voice from a megaphone boomed, "This is the police. Put your hands in the air." Mark's head snapped up, his eyes darting wildly around the room. He was a caged animal, and I was the one who had sprung the trap. He lunged for me one last time, a desperate, final act of a broken man, but I was faster. I sidestepped him, and he stumbled, falling to the ground with a grunt. The police officers rushed in, their guns drawn, and in a matter of seconds, they had him on the ground, his hands cuffed behind his back. As they led him away, his eyes, filled with a primal, unadulterated hatred, met mine. "You're a monster, Elizabeth," he spat, his voice a low growl. "You're worse than I am." I just smiled, a cold, empty smile. "No, Mark," I said, my voice steady. "I'm a survivor, and you're a loser, and you're going to rot in jail for the rest of your life." The aftermath was a blur of police reports, legal documents, and interviews with the media. The story of Mark's corporate fraud, of his poisoned supplements, and of his murderous intent was a national sensation. His company's stock plummeted to zero, and the government launched a full-scale criminal investigation. The former CEO and other executives were arrested, and the entire pharmaceutical industry was under a microscope. I was a hero, a woman who had stood up to corporate greed and family betrayal
and had won. But the victory felt hollow. The revenge, so meticulously planned and so perfectly executed, had left a gaping hole in my heart. I had won the battle, but I had lost the war. The doorbell rang one afternoon, and I opened the door to find a tall, slender woman standing on my doorstep. It was Sarah. Her face was pale and gaunt, her eyes hollow, and her clothes were wrinkled and dirty. She looked older, more tired, more broken than I had ever seen her. "Mom," she said, her voice a low, broken whisper, "I'm so sorry." The 3 words I had wanted to hear for so long were a knife in my gut. They meant nothing. The pain, the betrayal, the loneliness, it had all been too much. It was too late. "I don't have a daughter anymore," I said, my voice as cold as ice. "I have a life, and I'm not sharing it with you." Her eyes filled with tears and she pleaded, "But I didn't know he was doing this to you. He told me it was a cure. He told me it was help you." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that she was just a victim, a naive young woman who had been manipulated by a master manipulator. But I couldn't. I couldn't forget the look on her face when she laughed at my pain. I couldn't forget the way she had abandoned me, the way she had treated me like a burden. I couldn't forget the cold, calculating words she had spoken to me on the phone. "You're a liar, Sarah," I said, my voice as steady as a rock. "You knew what he was doing. You were a part of his monstrous plan, and you, my dear, are going to pay for it." I closed the door in her face and just stood there, my back against the cold wood, my eyes closed. I felt a single tear roll down my cheek, a tear of triumph and of sadness. I had won. I had gotten my revenge. I had exposed them. I had ruined them, but I had lost my daughter.
My life, once a predictable series of routines and quiet moments, had been upended and remade into something unrecognizable. The media attention had been overwhelming at first, a relentless storm of cameras and questions that left me feeling exposed and vulnerable. But then, as quickly as it had begun, the frenzy died down, and I was left with a new kind of quiet, a profound echoing silence that was both a blessing and a curse. I was free, but I was also alone. The victory felt hollow. I had a new beginning, but it felt like the end. I spent the next few weeks getting my life in order. I hired a financial advisor, a brilliant woman named Charlotte who helped me manage my money and invest in new ventures. I sold the house, the one that held a lifetime of memories, and bought a smaller, more modern one on the other side of town. The old house felt haunted now, filled with the ghosts of a family I had lost. I needed a fresh start, a clean slate. I needed to move on. I started volunteering at a local animal shelter, a place filled with dogs and cats who had been abandoned and betrayed, just like me. They were broken, but they were also resilient. They were survivors, and in their eyes, I saw a reflection of myself. One afternoon, I was sitting in my new living room, the sun streaming through the large windows, when the phone rang. It was my lawyer, Susan. "Elizabeth," she said, her voice filled with a mix of triumph and sadness, "I have some news. Mark has been sentenced. He's going to spend the rest of his life in prison. And Sarah, well, they found her. She's been hiding in a small apartment on the other side of the country. She's been charged as an accomplice, and she's going to spend some time in prison too." I just sat there, the phone in my hand, my mind numb. It was a victory, a final act of revenge, but it felt empty. I had gotten my justice, but I had lost my family. I hung up the phone and just sat there, my mind a blank canvas. I had won. I had gotten my revenge. I had exposed them. I had ruined them, but I had lost my daughter. The pain was still there, but it was a different kind of pain now. It was the pain of a survivor.
the pain of a woman who had fought for her life and had won. I had a new beginning, a new life, and I was going to live it. I was going to travel. I was going to see the world. I was going to live the life that they had tried to steal from me. And I was going to do it all on my own terms. I was finally free. My final act of defiance was a quiet one. I didn't hold a press conference and I didn't give an interview. Instead, I went to my home office and took out a small, unassuming flash drive. It contained a video I had recorded of myself, a final message to the world, a message that I had recorded the night before I confronted Mark in the warehouse. In the video, I spoke of my journey, of the betrayal, of the pain, and of the ultimate triumph. I spoke of the strength of a woman who had been left for dead and had risen from the ashes. I spoke of the importance of family and of the deep, soul-crushing pain of betrayal. I spoke of the importance of standing up for what is right, even when it feels like the world is against you. I spoke of hope. I spoke of courage. I spoke of love. I uploaded the video to YouTube and then deleted the file from my computer. I was finally free. My story was now in the hands of the world, and I was ready to begin my new life, a life free of the ghosts of my past, a life filled with hope, a life filled with courage, a life filled with the sweet taste of freedom.